last one to catch up. All right. All right. Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. So for the podcast listeners that listen to Boss Uncaged, and for the book group people, this is kind of like a duality episode to where it's going to be kind of really fun because we're going to be talking about an individual that is a boss, but also she's a heavy reader as well. So I'm going to name her the SoulWriter boss because I think that just makes perfect sense for who she is and the character and what we're going to be talking about today. So Danielle, the floor is yours. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about you and what do you want to talk about today?
Thank you, SA, for having me today. I'm so thrilled to be here. I would like to tell everybody a little bit about me and my background and the services I provide, not only to let people know about what I do, but so they know what help is out there for their goals and their visions for their own lives and their products and services. So I'll start with the fact that I have a journalism degree from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I have done stints at the Tribune Company, at a local children's publishing company. I have been in journalism and digital marketing now for over 18 years. I have that much writing and editing experience now at this point. I have freelanced for multiple newspapers, magazines, you name it. I've written hundreds of e-newsletters, articles, etc. And now I have worked on over 16 books as of this date. And I am just completely thrilled that my life has led me in the direction of being able to help authors and help visionaries with their content and with what they want to share with the world. And what I really love about what I do specifically is ghostwriting. And a lot of people don't necessarily understand or know what ghostwriting is. So that's something that I want to discuss today so that people have a better understanding of the differences between a ghostwriter, a book coach, and an editor. And the main difference really is the fact that ghostwriters spend a lot more time and energy on the organizational aspects of the manuscript. And the book coach helps the author to organize their thoughts, but the author is ultimately responsible for the writing portion. The ghostwriter is responsible for the writing portion in that type of engagement. And then an editor comes in after a manuscript has been delivered. So when there is a full-length manuscript, that's when different types of editing commence. And what I do is called developmental editing, which is an overarching look, an overall picture of how the transitions are, if the content makes sense, if it's consistent, if the ideas are consistent, if there's enough storytelling involved to capture the reader's interest. So that's a little bit about my background and what I really love to do. A little bit more about me is I'm also a mom. So I have 2 young kids. And when I was pregnant with my son several years ago, I knew that I wanted to become an entrepreneur. And we had this conversation when we first met, SA, right, about the fact that being a parent is so important to us when that opportunity is given to us. And I knew that I really wanted to spend time with my son and now with my daughter as well. And I also knew I wanted to help authors. I wanted to help thought leaders become the people who they know that they can be, right? And it's so important, it's so critical to really take a step back and think about what are our goals, what are our values, where do we see ourselves, and then asking for help, right? That's something that I like to talk about a lot too, that we can discuss further, is how to delegate, how to ask for help, and how to be okay with asking for help, right? And in the case of working as a ghostwriter, people sometimes say, oh, well, how do you take credit for somebody else's work, right? But that's not how I look at it. I look at it as the fact that they are an expert in their field. They're an expert in their own life, but they're not necessarily an expert in how to organize their life on paper. That's where I come in. That's where a good ghostwriter comes in, that can organize and help to tell those stories and know how to interview the subject, the author in this case, and know what questions to ask to elicit those answers and those stories that we need to have on the paper. So that was a lot in a short amount of time, essay.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of onions to peel back with that. I mean, I think first and foremost, I think that's why I named you like the soul. Like obviously ghost being related to soul, but I mean, you're more than just a ghostwriter. I mean, you're actually putting levels and layers and techniques and strategies, and you're also building like more mentorship than just building books. So I wanted you to talk about that a little bit more. I want you to talk about, I think it was one of the videos that I saw with you, I think it was on your Instagram account, and you were talking about meditation, and it was about you are enough. So I want you to kind of dive into that a little bit. Like, what does that really mean? You're coming from a writing standpoint, but what does that really mean for someone that's helping an author write to tell them that they are enough?
That is such a wonderful question, and thank you for bringing that up. I do really enjoy working with authors in a spiritual capacity as well, where we utilize meditation, we utilize, pendulum oracle card readings if they want that, right? It's always an if. I say it's a tool in my toolbox. But what's critical about that specific meditation and discussing the fact that you are enough is if the clients who I'm working with don't believe they're enough, don't believe their stories are enough, then it is a lot more difficult for their truths to come out on the page, for them to be their most truthful, authentic, vulnerable selves. And what was happening, essay, several years ago was I was getting a lot of these book coaching clients who wanted to write memoir, but we could not crack open that wound that had been closed for a long period of time. And they wanted to reopen these experiences. A lot of them had gone through traumatic experiences. And when I say traumatic, I mean, it's, and I don't know if you have to put a warning out, but it is, sexual abuse, anything that deals with somebody's mental, it could be mental illness, it could be alcoholism, a lot of different parts were coming up, bubbling up to the surface. But what was happening was those experiences were still in the past, and they couldn't allow their present self to unleash that experience on the page. So what I started doing is trying to figure out ways of being cognizant of the fact that this is obviously very, very difficult for people to talk about, right? First of all, let alone write about, right? So if somebody wants to go back and dig into those wounds and reopen those wounds, they can do so. However, they need to know how to do that, not only effectively, but in a way where they are taking care of their present self. And utilizing meditation, having a coach who really understands the fact that this is difficult, this is a difficult process, is so important. You do not want to be set up with somebody on this experience. If you're an author looking for a book coach or looking for a ghostwriter, looking for an editor, you do not want to be set up with somebody who is going to judge you or judge your past experiences or judge your feelings regarding your past experiences. And unfortunately, I have definitely come across that. And I highly, highly recommend working with somebody who can listen with open arms.
So, I mean, I think that kind of gives me like another onion to peel back, right? So essentially there was another comment that you made, and I forgot which social media platform you made this on, but it was a video that you were talking about how you push your clients. And I think what you just talked about kind of leads into that. So there's two different pushes, right? There's a push when you're trying to push an author to create content, to make it more robust, to dig a little bit deeper, give a little bit more of themselves in the actual story. But on the other side, it's more of like a motivation. You're trying to get them to become their best selves before they even get to the writing. So I want you to talk about it. Obviously, there's two different types of push and pulls. And I want you to talk about how you're using these push and pulls to help them move forward.
Absolutely. And that's really, really critical to think about this in a spiritual sense and in a logical sense. Because what happens is if we spend too much time throughout the process on only working on reopening those wounds in a kind and empathetic way, and we're not utilizing our logical parts, which to me means what is our time frame for the writing? When do you want this book to be published? What is going on in terms of your day-to-day writing habits, right? Those are the logical questions that we always need to address along the way. So what I do first is I like to see if the client is bringing a specific type of energy to the call. Are they making excuses as to why they're not writing? Or do they actually not have time to write? Or do they not want to write about this subject, even though part of them said they did? And I have had people do that too, right? So then we have to go back to the drawing board, where one of the very first questions I always ask is, what are your goals for this book, right? And this is when we're talking about book, we're not talking about mentorship or thought leadership, consulting, or any other type of short form content pieces. When we're talking about a book, I want to know what those goals are. A lot of times it deals with a speaking career. It could deal with family legacy. It could be promoting themselves and their services to masses so that more people join their group programs or one-on-one programs. There's a lot of different ways to answer that question. The only wrong way to answer is to not know what those goals are. And what happens, Essay, is that when we get into that conversation and the person has no clue what their goals are, or they say, you know, somebody told me, so-and-so told me, oh, I should write a book. And then I had 3 other people tell me, oh, I should write a book. And I want to spend a minute talking about that word should, right? Because if we spend time thinking about what we should do rather than doing it, then we're going to berate ourselves. We're going to beat ourselves up about things that we should be doing, when really it might be somebody else's vision for you and what you want to do. Writing a book, a high quality book, does take time, and that's okay, right? If you want to do a short ebook and put it out there and have it as a lead magnet, and you have blog posts and you can throw something together, you can absolutely do that. I'm not saying you can't, but what we were talking about with these types of clients, a lot of times this is memoir, right? Or this is the personal growth book, where they are reopening those wounds because they want to share their story and help other people who may have had similar experiences. That's a lot of what I hear. So it's really important to balance what you were talking about, those two ideas, those two frame of minds, as to being there for the person in a spiritual and a kind way, but also being the coach, being the logical coach, and saying, listen, we need to figure out here what we are doing, what our time frame is. Why did you push back, this call 3 weeks? Why did you do, we get into that. I just had a client literally push back a call 3 weeks because she wasn't interested in her first book idea. And so we ended up redesigning her entire book idea and did a draft of an outline of a brand new book that she actually wants to write in an hour and a half. And that's what can happen when you're being truthful with yourself, first and foremost. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, I think you definitely nailed it. I'm kind of telling like the story, right? And I'm kind of telling the story about what you do for your clients. And it kind of leads me to another video clip that you had that you were talking about the flow chart, and it was like where to start. So I think that where you left off is a good point to then talk about. So now you have these clients, you're either helping them become more motivational, more outstanding, or you're helping them become better authors, but sometimes they don't know where to start. So I want you to talk about your flow chart and how you help them to organize to show them where to start first.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really like to do that I think I may have done that flow chart in the past. And one of the things I actually like to start with now is what I call my index card methodology. And this is what I do specifically for my coaching clients. I sometimes do it when I'm ghostwriting as well. It really depends on the type of book and if I feel I need it in order to organize all of my thoughts. So here's what I want you to do. If you have this book within you, and I just had a client who's writing a memoir, and that was one of the first exercises that we did, and my first homework assignment to her. And what I want you to do is write down each individual story that you have that you think you might incorporate into this book. You don't have to know where it's going to go necessarily for this specific exercise. The goal is to get all of the stories on separate index cards. And then the goal is to go back and hopefully with your coach, right? And if you are the author in this case, and you go back and you come up with your detailed outline. And from there, a lot of times we come up with those parts, right? A lot of the nonfiction books have 3 parts or 5 parts. And the index cards are normally stories. And some stories will go in part 1, some will go in part 2, some will go in part 3, etc. And what happens is the reason that I like the index card methodology so much is because it gets your brain thinking and moving in the direction that we need to go in. If we sit down, we say, oh gosh, there's so much work to do. I have no idea how to organize all of this information. I have no idea where to start. I don't know what to do. All you have to do is get some index cards from your local dollar store and a pen, one of your favorite pens, and you can spread out your index cards in a place where you want to spread them out. If it's a home office, if it's your bedroom, if it's a special room in your house or in your office space or at a friend's even, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that you start in that direction of writing down those stories. And what I like to do too, especially if you're writing personal growth or memoir, and even if you're writing business book and you're writing stories about your past experiences, write dates along with the stories. Doesn't have to be the specific day of the year. But what I want you to do is I want you to try to recall the season, right? So spring, summer, fall, winter, what have you. And then I want you to recall the year. And here's why, because a lot of the books that we read are chronological, right? So I'm not saying it has to be chronological what you're doing. However, it will help when organizing those stories into an outline form. So if somebody is listening and says, I don't know where to start, this is what I recommend. This is where I want you to start.
Very cool. So like I'm going to take that literally and we're going to base this podcast episode on that format. So our first index card was you talking about your business, what you're doing. And so we're just like laying out the land, and then at the end we can kind of reorg it, right? So I'm thinking the second card will kind of be a little bit more about your story. So I want you to kind of time travel back a little bit, and I want you to talk about when you were traveling the world, like when you were in Egypt and Jordan and Israel and you were in Hebrew school. I want you to talk about like that. Like how does that come into play to make you who you are today?
Oh, you really did a lot of research on me. Thank you. So I studied in at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem in 2008. So it was many years ago, but I was very young. It was when I was in college. And when I was there, I was very fortunate to be able to travel to several other countries.
Mhm.
And what I loved about that experience was it was the first time that I traveled by myself internationally. I knew one other person who was also going to be studying with me, and that's it. I didn't know anybody else. It was a brand new experience. So if you're 19, 20 years old and you've never done this before, it can be a scary experience, right? But what I love about what I did was I chose to be brave and curious. And I think that those two qualities have helped lead me to where I am today. And here's why. I was able to start trusting myself more and more when I was in various situations. If I was in a situation that I didn't feel comfortable in, or I did feel comfortable in, or I said, you know what, I don't want to spend a lot of time with this person, I started listening to my own gut instincts. And I think that that can be missing in a lot of people. I mean, it goes back to even what we said about the should statements, right? Where, oh, I should do this, I should do that. Well, what do you want to do? What does your gut instinct tell you? And when I was there, I was lucky enough, like I mentioned, I was able to go, I went to Greece by myself with nobody else. I had meals by myself with other people in hostels. I hadn't really had that experience before going, and it's very interesting. I'd say if you go to a restaurant at lunchtime or at dinner time and you're by yourself, and this was pre like cell phones. I did not have a smartphone, right? I had actual maps that I was navigating by myself. It was a skill that I had to learn. And I went to Egypt with a couple friends. I went to Jordan with a couple friends from my program. And then I also was able to travel to Prague. And it was a really amazing experience, all of them. And do not take it for granted any day of my life that I was able to do that and spend that time there. And one of the best things I could tell somebody else is to put yourself out there, put yourself in situations that might not feel as comfortable. You might feel intimidated. And I'll give another example. I started going recently to a new spin studio. I was very, very uncomfortable at first because I said, oh, wow, these people have been working out for years. I'm starting to get back into shape again. They have boxing. I just completed my second boxing class, and it was a little intimidating, but I didn't let the intimidation factor stop me. That's the thing that I want everybody to take away from this. If you feel intimidated about a situation versus it's a dangerous situation, that's obviously a very different feeling, a very different situation. But that's really what helped me to seek my truth and become who I am today. And one of the things, Essay, that I have said throughout my whole career that I think I probably developed during that time when I was studying abroad is I will figure it out. I will figure it out. And I think that that is such an important phrase to be okay with. I mean, I've had people ask me to do things that I never thought that I could have done, but they had the confidence. And then I also had the confidence. I started having more confidence in myself, right? Where I said, you know what, I haven't done this before, but I know I can figure it out because I'm a smart, capable human being, right? And a lot of times I feel like we deter from those situations. We don't allow ourselves to be in those situations in the first place. But by saying I'll figure it out, instead of saying, oh no, I can't do that, or I don't do that. Why not? Why can't you do that? What is stopping you? What's preventing you?
Hmm. I think it's definitely interesting. So like this close out this index card with 3 to 5 words that you identify with yourself. And they could be any keywords that you kind of think, if you had to do a quick outline of 4 to 5 bullets, which one of those keywords would you choose to identify you?
Well, I have heard in the past, and I believe this is truthful. I'll pick 3 to start. Charismatic, genuine, and kind.
Hmm.
And I think kindness can go a very long way when knowing how to be kind. I think people say kind a lot of times and they don't actually know how to be kind and what that means. I think being charismatic is partially why I fell into journalism, because I care about people's stories and I really truly do care about others and making the world a better place, as cliche as that may sound. And then genuine, I will bring honesty to the table every single time. I will not beat around the bush. I will be 1000% honest with you.
Very cool. Very cool. So like new index card, right? And again, I like this method, so we're gonna stick with it, right? So I
Okay.
want to talk about like your family atmosphere. I mean, obviously you have 2 kids and you have a son called Eli, and you did this really cool video. I think you were talking about children's books, and he was sitting on your lap, which kind of goes into your background talking about children's books. So I want you to kind of time travel back and talk to us about what kind of kid were you when you were growing up?
Great question. I was the kid who always wanted to be better.
Mm,
I always worked extremely hard. I was in way too many activities in high school, which I don't know how I functioned with the lack of sleep, but I did. And I always wanted to strive to please others.
mm,
And I think that growing up, I didn't know how to not be a people pleaser.
mm,
I just wasn't sure how to do that. And that's something that I feel I don't want to say struggled with, because I do feel that I'm in a much better place with that part of myself than I used to be even 5 years ago.
mm,
And my parents have always said if I colored outside the lines as a little girl, I would get livid and I would throw the paper, throw the pencil. I would not be happy with that. And I always wanted to do well for myself, for my family. I have a little brother myself, although he is much taller than me and has a beard, so he looks older than me now. And in terms of what I figured out when I became a new mom, I think that I have developed such a sense of what I want to do as a mom that I didn't do for myself
mm,
before I was a mom. And that includes taking care of myself, of my health, my business, and knowing that when the whole idea behind giving yourself the full cup before you give somebody else, it's
mm.
like the airplane scenario with the oxygen masks.
Yeah.
There's a reason why, right? It's because I feel I'm a better mom when I'm able to do good work in the world. And when I'm able to write, when I'm able to help others in a genuine, charismatic way, in a kind way, it means so much to me. And I truly, truly believe that. And I think I've always been this way in terms of those 3 characteristics we talked about. My best friend, who is now an ER nurse, We met in fourth grade because I asked her to play tag and she was new at the school, right? And we're still close to this day. That's not always the case, obviously, with every single friendship. I've had, lows in those departments as well, just like everybody else. But I think it's always important to look out for people who might not know where they stand in the world or might feel isolated, and look out for them.
I think it's definitely interesting. I mean, you brought up your parents in that last statement, and you were talking about coloring outside of lines and being extremely hard on yourself. And again, I'm going to make a comment, and I want you to correct me if I'm right or wrong. That would suggest that maybe you're hard on yourself because maybe you've seen a parent being hard on themselves because they were entrepreneurs, or were they business owners? And the stem of this question is really trying to get to the root of, like, where are you getting your business savviness from, and why were you so hard on yourself at such a young age?
Great question. So I think the question is twofold, and I have a twofold answer. One is my dad is an entrepreneur. He has had his own business in the 401k planning industry for many years. And he worked extremely hard when my brother and I were very little. There was not a lot of money. There was, my parents have said a lot about how it was very hard when we were very little, because my dad was getting his business off the ground, and he's extremely successful now. Thank goodness. He's had it for over 35 years now. He's done keynote speaking engagements all over the country. He's like well known in this industry. And my mom stayed home with us. There weren't as many options for women back then. It was either you take 6 weeks maternity leave, or you quit your job and stay home. And I've heard this from many, many other people who have moms who had to make one decision or another. My mother-in-law made the opposite decision, took 6 weeks off and went back to my stepmother-in-law, I should say. So, but I think that that's something that is so critical. We could have a whole podcast episode about that too, right? But it's so important to recognize the gratitude that I have, that I know a lot of other female entrepreneurs have now, with the fact that we do have this technology and we are able to work from home. We're able to work part-time from home, and we're able to also care for our kids part or full-time. And those options did not exist back then, right? They just didn't. It was either you worked, you went into an office, or you were at home. And now there are just a plethora of options, and it's absolutely beautiful, right? That we're lucky that this is the world that we're in. And then the other part of that, in terms of being hard on myself, it's interesting. I've done a lot of work on myself in terms of ancestral healing, and we don't have to get into it in a ton, but what's interesting about this aspect of myself is that my mom is German, and my dad, he was born here, and so were my grandparents on that side, but it's Eastern European. So and my grandparents on my mom's side came here from Germany. So my mom was first generation born American, and they came here with nothing right before the war, and were Jewish. I had a lot of relatives who unfortunately perished in the Holocaust. And I have been to Dachau, and with he was my boyfriend at the time, not my husband. And I think that there's something to be said about having those ancestral ties and that history of being Jewish and being a marginalized group of people throughout the world for many centuries. We were kicked out of so many places over so many decades and years. In Portugal, Spain, there's a lot of history there, right? And I think that there is something to be said about having being born into that, right? Being born into knowing that those are your roots, right? And I think being hard on myself, I think that I desperately wanted to do well, right? I wanted to get A's in school. I wanted to do very well. I became the editor-in-chief of my high school newspaper, right? I've been doing, like I said, writing and editing literally my entire life. I played flute and piano and did soccer in high school, right? It's just, I mean, I wanted to do everything because I wanted to know that I could prove to myself that I could be really good at all these different areas. But the thing is, essay about proving to yourself, right? As we know too, is when you try to prove to yourself, you ask yourself, am I really trying to prove this to myself or am I trying to prove this to somebody else? And now I've been asking myself, especially the last few years, am I doing this activity to prove something to somebody else? Or am I doing this to prove it to myself? And how does that negatively impact or positively impact me and my family, right? And especially the fact that I have 2 little kids now. It's how can I be the best mom I can be? And what am I doing to achieve that for me and my kids? It's not for anybody else. I don't care what anybody else thinks anymore, but I used to.
So, I mean, with that, let's say you're sitting down, right? And I brought up the video earlier about you and Eli sitting down talking about kids' book. Just say you have your daughter and your son sitting down. Let's say it's 15 years from now, and you can select maybe 1 to 2 books that you recall that have helped you to evolve to where you are. And I'm talking about more so like nonfiction, in the nonfiction space. What would those 1 to 2 books be that you would like your kids to read 10, 12 years down the road from now?
So one book is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. And I think we talked about this last time that we spoke. What I love about that book is it's literally, it is a writing guide about how to write, but it's also very much so about how to not procrastinate something that you actually want to get done and really breaking things down bird by bird, little by little, and seeking how you can do that, right? Different scenarios, different examples. And I love how Anne Lamott structures the book. I think it's a gold mine. I think everybody should read it. So that would be number 1. And then I think another book that really positively affected me is Jen Sincero's book, her original book, You Are a Badass. And I really felt that she was talking directly to me when I was reading it. And it gave me a sense of confidence when I needed someone else to give me that confidence, when I couldn't find it in myself. And I think that reading books that can give you that confidence, that can give you ideas when you're seeking them. And all of us go through those phases, right? We all go through them. I'm not in that phase right now, but I might be again later in my life. I'm not sure. But what's important is that we know we can always go back. We know that we have those tools that we can go back to these specific books and ideas. And I really resonated with the stories that she told in the book. And then the third book that I really like and that I want to recommend is Get Rich, Lucky Bitch. And that's by, her name is escaping me right now, but I'm gonna, and Denise Duffield Thomas, I believe. And I love this book because she talks about how you are a female motivator, a female empowerment. You're full of just this beautiful soul that can do anything. when you put your mind to it. And she gives a lot of examples of how to do that. And she's funny. And I really like these books that are funny. And the other reason why I wanted to pick 3 female authors is because I think a lot of people pick, not to be specific, but a lot of people pick white male authors, right? Like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, or The Power of Habit, or all these other books which are great, by the way, they're great books. But I want to also shine a light on the fact that there are a lot of females who are writing really, really powerful books that need to be paid attention to.
So, I mean, I just take the energy from Jen and the last book you talked about, and let's like funnel it through you, right? You're talking to an audience of females, and you have an opportunity to give them words of insight, words of wisdom. They're all thinking about writing books, and they're trying to figure out their next steps. What words of insight would you like to give to them in your best Jen voice to kind of get that synergy through, to get them to get off the horse and start running full speed?
Stop making excuses. Stop procrastinating your life that you want to have. Stop, if it's drinking wine after the kids go to bed, if it's scrolling social media for no reason, there are apps to block those, right? And I do use those, right? There are ways to get around what you think you need to do. What's going to happen in your life in the next week if you don't go on social media, or if you don't drink that glass of wine, or if you don't turn on that TV, and instead you sit down and you start writing those index cards? How long is it actually going to take you? Stop making excuses as to you don't have time. Even if you have a million obligations going on, find those windows of time. Do you actually want to do this? Or is somebody else telling you you should? If you in your heart know that you have this book idea and you want to do this, then why are you not trying? You can do this, right? You can sit down, you can find time. If you can't sit down and find time and you're driving, you have 4 or 5 kids, you're going full speed, you have a lot of responsibilities, you can still find time in your day to take notes. You can use voice apps. You can go on walks, when you're on a walk, when you're at a park, when you're in the pickup line, when you're driving somebody from activity to activity to activity. I want you to pick up your phone and start recording those index cards to yourself. And you will find time to transcribe them. Don't worry about that. Worry about getting the ideas down in one way or the other. You can do it.
Very cool. I think that's a hell of an opening to go to another card. And this card is a card that I like to use for like the books that I'm writing and the books that I help people write. And it's kind of like a call of action card. It's a card to kind of put out there what you want the audience to do when they read this book. So in your case, I want you to kind of give some call of actions, like how could someone get in contact with you? Where do they find you? What platforms are you on? And what's the next steps that they want to work with you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. If somebody wants to get into contact with me, they can go to my website, first of all, which is the Soul-Aligned Ghostwriter.com. And there's a button there where you can schedule a consultation with me. And you can fill out a very, very simple, easy Google form. I will get your answers and I will personally send you a text message, not an AI tool, not an assistant. I will reach out to you directly and we'll have a conversation. We'll have an exploratory conversation about what your goals are. I always like to know what somebody's goals are, who the target audience is. And you know what I always say, is if I'm not the right person to help you, I want to be able to find somebody in my referral network to help you get to that next step, right? So that's one way. Another way is just email me directly, Danielle at the Soul-Aligned Ghostwriter.com. Just send me an email. Let's have a conversation.
I think you brought up a really solid point, and it kind of it made a shift in this particular episode, right? So I usually kind of go into a bonus question, but again, based upon what you said and where we are with terminology and technology right now, I'm going to create a new bonus question on the spot just for you, right? You brought up AI, right? And being that you're a writer and you read books, and in today's world, there AI is a new tool that can be used. Are you more so leaning towards the side of using it as an asset, or are you more so the side of Terminator is going to end our life as we know it?
I am in option, I'm in camp A right now. I believe that AI can be a very helpful and useful tool to give you basic ideas on what you want to write about.
Mm-hmm.
I would literally never use anything it has generated for any work. However, if you have writer's block, which by the way, I do call writer's mindset, all has to do with mindset. If you can't think of how you want to structure something, or if you want to ask how to rephrase something, or you want to come up with 5 million different types of book titles, you can use AI to generate ideas. What AI doesn't have is that human aspect, the human story aspect. You know your stories better than the computer does.
Mm-hmm.
More than, ChatGPT can get all of this data from many, many years, but unless they know you specifically, they don't know your emotions and how you were feeling. And that is what's missing in what AI brings. AI does not bring storytelling with human emotion. AI brings general ideas, which are also great and so important, but we don't need to sit here and say, an AI tool can be responsible for an entire book, right? It's not going to be a great book between us, right? It's just not going to be a great book. So I don't recommend using it to write an entire book. I do recommend utilizing it in a way that makes sense for you to generate ideas.
So going into my last bonus question, right? And I think that last answer was a phenomenal answer. I mean, it's kind of like there's two schools of thought when it comes to AI, right? I mean, either you're pro or you're against it, but I always say, if you're going to leverage something that's new, get on the bandwagon, figure it out, and use it as an asset versus making an enemy, right? So going based upon what you said and going back to what you said earlier about being hard on yourself, drawing, over the lines and getting frustrated and tearing up the paper, I would think that you talked about the story about making different achievements and wanting to get to a different level with different goals. So this question is to you, what is your most significant achievement to date?
That's a tough question. Just in life in general.
It could be business related. It could be, I always try to say, obviously I think family and kids is kind of, it goes without saying. So outside of that.
Outside of that. Okay. Because I was going to say, obviously my 2 children, but besides them, I would say being able to continuously build my business and put myself out there. And it might seem a little general, but it's every single day. That's how we met. That's how I meet people on various platforms on a daily basis, is because I put myself out there and I don't give up. And in business, there are ebbs and flows, and you have to understand that, right? I really don't like the narrative where sometimes we see on social media that, oh, I had a 6-figure year and my business is doing so well. And then you find out that, yeah, they made 6 figures, but they spent 7 figures on coaching and advertising and all sorts of marketing, right? And I feel like that is a narrative that I hear frequently, and I don't like it because I don't think that it's it helps individuals who actually want to start a business and know how to go about doing that in an authentic and honest way. So my favorite thing, my best achievement was, I would say, back when I was in a mass layoff after the Tribune, which is many, many years ago, I told myself, and I was going through some health issues as well. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. That's a whole other conversation, which I had to deal with as well on top of that. But I told myself I was going to start going to networking events and I would start learning digital marketing. I would become a social media marketer along with a journalist, and I was going to figure it out. And again, that figure it out attitude has led me to so many different wonderful places. And I highly, highly encourage anybody listening to instead, if somebody asks you if you can do something, say, that sounds fun. I can figure it out.
Very cool. I think a new keyword you should add on is relentless. I think that's the only word that you've been describing this entire time that didn't come up one time. So relentless is definitely one of those keywords. So going into closing, man, I like to give whoever I'm interviewing an opportunity to become the host of my podcast. So do you have any questions? The Boss Uncaged podcast is now officially yours.
Oh. S.A., what is your most significant achievement to date?
That's difficult because I mean, like to your point, I keep coming up with things that all fall into a bubble of what I'm building. And I would say outside of family, outside of recovering from a stroke, I would definitely think the Boss Uncaged as a not an experiment, but more so an example of what branding can really do. And like we're still only early. We're like Boss Uncaged is like 2.5 years old. So like in the scheme of things, where is this brand and everything that we're building now going to be 20 years or 10 years down the road?
Right. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. What is your morning routine like?
That is an interesting thing because it's changed over the years, but now I usually wake up somewhere between 1:30 and 3 o'clock every morning. And I literally got into the habit of just writing. So I'll get up and I'll like have writing prompts and I'll do some research and I'll play with AI and I'll formulate some different things and different ideas and different concepts. And I try to come up with at least one 3,000 character to maybe 1,500 word count article or blog post every single morning. And then what I do after I get all that squared away and get done, I'll check some emails. I'll take a nap literally from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And then when I get up 8 o'clock, which is before 9 o'clock, that's when I really start my official business day. And then I'm up and running. So either I go for a walk, try to get some coffee, and I mix it up a little bit. But ideally by 9 o'clock, I am in the zone grinding either on calls or podcasts or working on new brand items.
So what time do you go to bed?
So I usually crash like around 10 o'clock. So I go from 10 o'clock, then I wake up at like 1 o'clock. And then that's why I have to take multiple naps. I just learned that I can't sleep for the full 8 hours. So I sleep for that bulk of time between 10 to 1. Then I sleep from 6 to 8. And then usually like around 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I'll crash again for a couple hours. And then I'm back up again like 7, 8 till 10. So my schedule is completely crazy. I wouldn't recommend it for anyone, but it works for me and it gives me a time for me to go up and down. So I'm always up and down throughout the day. So my days last a lot longer than most people.
Yeah. Wow. That is very interesting. Very, very interesting. I love it.
Yep.
Very cool. I'm trying to think what other questions. I didn't anticipate this. I didn't prepare properly, S.A.
To catch you off guard. I mean, you got to be on your toes. And you can't have the same old podcast that you've been on 1,000 times before.
No. What's your favorite nonfiction book?
I always bring up this particular one because I love it. And believe it or not, it's a female author. So the 5-second rule. I love the 5-second rule because it just kind of gives the aspect of wherever you are, whatever you're doing, that 5 seconds of hesitation, give yourself just that. Hesitate for those 5 seconds and then make a choice, take action. And then like a lot of times I think people that are doctors and surgeons, they have that 5-second rule built into them. Somebody is dying on the table. They can't waste more than 5 seconds. They could lose that patient.
Yes.
So they have to make a decision and have to make a choice. And I think if people take that aspect of everything, when that 5-second rule comes into play, becomes more of an emergency and you can't hesitate, you can't sit back, you can't procrastinate, you have to take action. Take the 5 seconds, breathe, count to 5, and then do whatever it needs to be done and get it done.
I love that. I implement the 5-second rule constantly, and I love Mel Robbins, and I listen to her podcast occasionally as well. And I think it's such a simple rule, but it's so effective. And that's something that I really love about even our conversation today is it's just simple and effective. If you tell yourself to stop making excuses, if you tell yourself, yeah, I can do anything, I can figure it out. They're simple words, but that verbiage that you tell yourself is so important. So I have one last question then. Do you keep a gratitude journal and or an affirmation journal?
So my journal, if you would open up my journal, you would probably think that I'm either on the spectrum or I'm batshit crazy. Like, so I definitely have a journal, but the information that comes to me, it comes to me in so many different fragments, and I write in fragmentation. So like visually, when I look at it, I know exactly what it is, but if somebody else looks at it, they're going to be like, what the hell is that? But I know that part of my notes were written down here, and then maybe I've done a Google search and put that note on another, like a digital doc, and they're tied together in my mind. So I know what both information, when they come together, what they mean, but separately to someone else, they don't mean anything.
Fascinating. Fascinating. I I really like writing down and saying out loud um my gratitudes for the day.
Mhm.
And the reason why I asked too is because I believe Mel Robbins, her second book, maybe it's her another, it's one of her most recent books. But one of the things I've heard her talk about is the fact that you can wake up in the morning and you look at yourself in the mirror and you tell yourself affirmations while looking at yourself in
Mhm.
the mirror. And it could be brushing your teeth, it could be doing anything, but you're literally looking at yourself. You're not looking at something else. And giving yourself that confidence and that boost in the morning can be so beneficial. And I heard her talk about it. It was either on her podcast or another podcast, but it was absolutely brilliant. And it was something that I was curious about in terms of, if you write affirmations or if you tell yourself affirmations or, I think that it's so important to talk about our gratitudes on a daily basis. And just, I'll ask my husband almost every day, what are you grateful for today?
Mhm.
And just having that mindset. And I think that can be very beneficial for our mental health, is
Yeah.
to sit back, even if you have a really bad day. Sometimes I sit back and say, okay, what am I grateful for today? I'm
Mhm.
grateful that I got some electrolytes in my water bottle this morning, right? It could be something so simple, but it really is effective. So that's why I was curious.
Yeah, I mean, mine's a little bit different. Like I have affirmations that are pre-recorded. So like if I say, I'm not going to say the name of the device, but if I say the Amazon or the Google device, and then I say, hey, good night or good morning, it'll start to recite something that I have written that tells me step by step of where I'm at and where I'm going and the goals that I need to achieve before my time's up.
Yes, yes, amazing. I love that. Do you give yourself New Year's resolutions? Speaking of goals?
I stopped. I used to before, but it was just kind of like, why do I need to wait to New Year's to give myself a resolution? And when in reality, that every day is a day that I may not have the next day. So I'm treating every day like it's my last. So every day I wake up with the intentions of achieving something. So I look at every day as a new year.
I love that. Thank you. Amazing. Amazing. That's fantastic. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, I definitely appreciate. I think you brought so many different elements to the table, and I wish that we had an opportunity to talk for like another hour because there's so many other things that we can kind of unpack. So I would definitely like to, pull you back in because I got another podcast on the book side of things, so we can kind of just talk more about like the books you're writing, how you're writing them, so we get more into detail of that. But then we can kind of continue this conversation. So I definitely appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, SA. I really appreciate you.
Great.